goodness, after that introduction, I'm actually a little bit nervous now, Hugh. Thank you very much. Hugh is quite correct in that I have travelled around Australia and spoken at a lot of conferences, and it's always a delight to see so many regional councils, and in particular Southern Grampians, Glenelgshire, Northern Grampians, at those seeking to soak up all of that information to bring back to their communities. So thank you very much, Hugh and Mayor, for the invitation today. It's a delight to be here. So I'm just now get myself organised. So just a little bit about me. So I actually work at the University of Sydney and in a multidisciplinary team called the Smart Urbanism Lab, and so I focus on smart cities. I also look at the policy and research for the National Growth Areas Alliance, which is all the outer suburbs. So I'm very much an urban-focused worker. And I am very active nationally in Smart Cities Council, where I'm on the policy and leadership group, where we advocate for change in policy. But I actually live here in Portland, in southwest Victoria. So, and I moved back to Portland 5 years ago, and what that really did for me was sharpen my lens, and I grew up in the country, actually. I was born in South Australia, and I grew up on a dairy farm there. So by returning back to the region, it really sharpened my lens around the digital divide that can exist and how critical it is that we tackle that. So that's some background on me. But today I'm really going to speak about what's the why. Why are we looking at digital? Hugh and the team have put together a wonderful agenda then moving forward that will talk about technology and smart agriculture and smart communities. But I just want to focus on the why. How would you spend $7? Coffee, absolutely. When I was preparing for this talk, I actually came across this example from my resources, which is based in the Ivory Coast. You think, my goodness, why are we talking about the Ivory Coast in Southern Grampians Shire? But it reminded me of a time 2 years ago when I went to Vanuatu with my daughter, who went to Hamilton and Alexander College here, and I was her escort for some volunteer work, and we met a lady called Bennington, and she was the equivalent of this man here. This man here has spent $7 for a mobile phone, a photovoltaic panel, and a battery. So what it enables him, that $7, is purchases his electricity for the month. How it relates to Vanuatu is it really brought home to me is that I remember my first day when I arrived, and it was the afternoon, and Bennington, who was the wife of the chief, said to me, "Have a cup of tea." Being gracious, I said, "Of course." And I didn't have another cup of tea during the day from then on, because what I realised is that her daughter, Georgina, then needed to create the fire. She just returned from school, so she took about an hour to get the cup of tea, but she had to collect the wood, make the fire, get the water to boil it, and I had a cup of tea. But Bennington did have a mobile phone, but that mobile phone was for the whole village, and she was the trader. The mobile phone was connected to the battery, which had a PV panel on the roof to charge it, and that was their community. But the role of digital in that was a connection to a market. It enabled electricity production and battery storage, and it changed the life of that small community. So we might think that we're in a developed country sometimes in a regional area, but it shows you how digital transforms communities in a very basic way. The message that I want to share this morning is the digital future is here. It's just uneven and incredibly uneven. And the message to us and to everyone else is that we locally here need to invest and act. And congratulations to the Southern Grampians Shire and the Great South Coast for their action in this area. So I had written the presentation on the weekend, and then yesterday, busy day, and I was doing lots of things, and I thought, oh my goodness, digital in action. So yesterday, this was me in my home office. I was on Zoom, which for those of you who know Zoom, 5 years ago I couldn't even had a teleconference. The three ladies in the picture are in Sydney, and we're convening a symposium that's going to be held later in the year. Outside of my home office is an NBN, fibre to the node. Fortunately, it was located quite near us. So for me, life is good. If I didn't have that, I wouldn't be able to actually live where I live. At the same time, down at the local library, there's a 3D printer that's been there for 18 months, and they were running 2 information sessions. In the evening, 30 people arrived to learn how to do 3D printing. It was called Plastic Fantastic. Not sure about that tagline. Plastic's not fantastic. At the same time, we had a tour out here of the smart farming at Angus's farm, which we had 84 people go to. At the same time, Southwest TAFE had 3 classrooms operating smart class with a session in Portland, Hamilton and Warrnambool. That would not have happened 5 years ago. Digital is here, it is now, it's real. And it's actually transforming our lives every day. So when we go to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, absolutely Wi-Fi and battery is now at the base level, whether you're in a developing country or whether you're in a developed country such as ours. I've crossed out Wi-Fi and put connectivity because obviously before you have Wi-Fi, you also need some other forms of connectivity. And it's actually interesting, the other week I was in a presentation around the behaviour that this battery generates. How many people in here have asked a complete stranger if they have a charger for an iPhone because you've run out of battery? Or who's got a teenager who complains at you as the parent that says, oh, I've got only 80% left, I need to charge. So digital is the enabler for our communities. What you saw yesterday is obviously from a smart agriculture perspective, it can change the way we do agriculture, but equally in an urban area, we have, in a rural area, we have urban areas where we need to have different digital infrastructure to underpin our education and our health systems and the way our community lives. So let's look sort of beyond Southwest Victoria and yesterday and why regional Australia. 1/3 of the total population, more than 2/3 of the national export. Significant contributor to the national economy. So when we think about it in that context, if we as a whole regional community in Australia aren't prosperous, it impacts on our national economy and agenda. So it's in the nation's interest for us to ensure that we are in the best position possible to compete globally and locally. As we know, there is a digital divide. And for me, travelling from where I live to where I work, it is absolutely extreme and worsening. It's compounded for single parents who have less income, higher expenditure. So digital might be something that's a struggle. For the elderly who are still coming to terms with new digital technologies. For the unwell, particularly in a regional area, and also the disabled. So in a regional area, those differences are compounded even more, as you know. So one way to measure that is the Digital Inclusion Index. And this is a collaboration between Telstra, RMIT University and Swinburne, and Ray Morgan is an enabler. And it's a really interesting way for us to measure our inclusion. The positive story is that it's improving. but I would encourage you to look at this document and understand it more fully, particularly if you are doing community planning. 3 key areas that it's focused on is awareness, access and ability. I've actually combined under access is affordability. So awareness is our knowledge of digital and the way it changes our life. Access is broken into a whole range of areas. It's not just the technology that we access, but whether we can afford to and what percentage of our dollar or our earnings do we need to spend on it, and our ability to use is our capacity to use it as well as our knowledge. So if you can see, can everyone see that? Is the lighting okay? So I did take it to Victoria. So the Australian average is 60.1. Don't ask me what the actual figures need, just take it as a level, 60.1. Western Victoria is 52.8. So it is significant that we are 10 points below that national indicator. And Northern Victoria and West Victoria were the 2 lowest scoring. Now remember, these are averages, aren't they? So as we know in regional areas, when you go into more isolated pockets within your community, there is increasing disadvantage. I'm not expecting you to look at those figures, but I've just highlighted Western Victoria. And if we start to look at the breakdown within those indices, if you can't see the detail, but if we looked at affordability, which is value of expenditure, it's around the 40. If you compare to the other end, where you're in more of a metropolitan area, it is up to around the 60. So it gives you a way to start to interrogate what are the barriers to digital inclusion. In this case, it's affordability. The cost to purchase that access is too great. When we look at digital ability, it's also very low. So knowledge and awareness is worse in our area than it is in others. So Victoria's as a whole in the regional area, our gap between country and city is the worst in the state. So events such as this is the first step, or one of the first steps to actually close that, and we need to do it quickly. Another indicator, this research was done by from Flinders University, the Centre of Social Research Excellence in the Social Determinants of Health. Now, let me just explain that. On the left-hand side are the major cities. The columns are the CEFA index, the social economic indicator for areas developed by the ABS. Number 1 is where you've got a low CEFA score. Number 10 is the highest. So the column to my right is 1, and so that's obviously a lower CEFA score. And to my left is high. So this research showed that there was a correlation between the type of access, so fibre to the premise, fibre to the node, when you took it looking at fixed infrastructure, is the best quality, most reliable. And not surprisingly, there was a positive correlation between those areas with a high CEFA index than those with obviously better access. What's interesting though is when you look to the graph on the left, obviously it's the regional slide, and it's not surprising. The areas with the higher CEFA index have got the fibre, less fixed wireless, less satellite, whereas our more rural areas with the worse CEFA index has greater disadvantage. So that's not surprising. However, the reason I'm showing that to you is that it's important that we understand that whilst it is changing, it's not changing fast enough, because in the major cities, there's exponential growth in digital speed and digital inclusion. So I put that there as a caution. Let's keep our eye on that. So why bridge the rural divide? You notice I've got it going both ways. So I pulled these statistics from the PDP, the Precision to Decision Agriculture report. And I'm not an economist, so I'm not going to unpack those figures, but if we don't improve our production and become more competitive, it will impact on our nation's economy. I think whilst I can't unpack the 20.3 billion, I understand what an increased percentage of 25% is to a farmer when margins are so slow. What's important is that, and as I think you saw yesterday and what you'll hear today, is an enabler of that is the fit-for-purpose infrastructure to enable that. It's not one size fits all, and it's not necessarily fibre, it's not just LP WAN. It's a combination, whatever your agriculture purpose is. So, number one reason, we need to grow the nation's economy, so we need to unlock that productivity. As you know, the second thing we need to do in rural and regional areas is to create diversified economies. Particularly in this region, we know there's been a structural shift and structural change. For us to remain competitive, but also retain and attract the population that we want to live here and need to live here, we need to have different industry offerings. Having digital infrastructure is an enabler for that. The second reason we need to focus on regional Australia is to retain and attract the population. Anyone who's working in regional areas knows that that is a major challenge for us. I think in this region alone there's up to 1,000 job vacancies as we speak. Being a director on a local hospital, I know that the shortage of skilled workforce is critical. I point to these three examples. The top one is the Coombe University Centre. So an enabler for that, for attracting and retaining population, is education. So this is a digitally connected, high-speed, university-agnostic campus which services the region and enables people to get tertiary education without travelling. I know in this region there's been moves to embrace that locally, which is what's required. The GP from Geelong, I have that picture there because we need skilled workers, but often their wife or husband can't find a job at the same time, or their education outcomes might not be able to be delivered for their children. So we need to ensure that that offering's there. The bottom one, which is farm pay, I put this because it typifies what I'm hoping will happen in regional communities. I met Naomi Watts in Sydney, and she was a recipient of an accelerator called She Starts. And this ag tech business was born in Wagga Wagga, and it was out of real life experience where on a grain farm, her family was going through difficult times with cash flow. As grain was sold, there wasn't transparency about where that was in the supply chain, when she was going to receive money in the bank. Out of that desperation, she got funding through an accelerator, which is a tool that I would hope we would have here, where you encourage people locally to create new businesses. She created an app which farmers can then use to manage their cash flow with their purchases and manage their supply chain. So it's that sort of entrepreneurialism in a regional area that we want to encourage. So it's about creating the environment for that. So I suppose the picture I'm painting so far is digital inclusion is important. We're at a stage where we know that there's a gap. There's a critical reason for us to close that digital divide. And yes, we are moving in the right direction. And what I put here is advocacy and local action is a really important thing. When I say advocacy, I'm talking about each and every one of us to be active citizens, industry leaders, government leaders and community leaders in how we address those three indicators of digital inclusion. So just to touch on some interventions, and this morning I looked at the presentation and thought, oh my goodness, why have I used the word intervention? That sounds a little bit, you know. But I actually know why I put that there is because we need to intervene daily in people's lives, in our communities' lives, to actually affect the change. I was talking to Ben, who's going to speak later, formerly from the aviation industry, went into local government in regional South Australia. And yes, we need the impatience for change to actually take us on that digital journey. So we need those evangelists. So digital by default is how we move to digital inclusion. I think on the photo on the far left is a picture of the regional assembly that was held here in Hamilton. A wonderful example of bringing together community, industry, all levels of government together to look at how we solve community problems. A great place to start. We also need to look at what's the digital enabler for the problems that were identified and focus on what the need is. If we look back at that digital inclusion network indice, and we see that when we analyse the stats, that it's the single parents' children age percentile between 15 and 18 that are the ones that are excluded from the digital economy. Well, as a local community, that's what is the immediate need is, and let's get an action plan around that. So let's do micro actions to address our issues here in regional Australia. So just to finish off with some other thoughts. So in my work, I do case study analysis for cities internationally and in Australia around interventions. So I use these couple of examples. I've got innovative connectivity, but fit for purpose. So we all don't need fibre to the premise everywhere. It would be wonderful, but it's not realistic, is it, from a cost perspective? On the left here, down the bottom, is Peter Ull, who is the CIO from the City of Adelaide, who I met and took the photo of him in front of his storyboard, which was before he started 10 Gig City, which is, as many of you might know, is in the CBD of Adelaide, the City of Adelaide. The reason I have this example is that this was around high-speed fibre connection, 10 gig, and the business case stacked up. You know, they wanted to have 1,000 businesses connected to this network in the first year. The precursor to that is the council got on the journey and identified their conduit that was existing in their CBD. They collaborated with the NBN Co to find out where they had their fibre. They worked with industry partners to come up with a solution, built the business case and rolled it out. And it's been a tremendous success. That doesn't mean that that model is going to work everywhere, but you can take the concept. So the picture on the left is a startup who a colleague of mine is involved in, which is Smart FarmNet. It's about cooperative fibre, and they're running a pilot just outside of Goulburn where they encourage farmers to join a cooperative to invest in the construction of their own fibre, which then they would then use to run their own network. Now, as you can imagine, for those technologists in the room, fibre means digging trenches. Across farmland is not always easy. So obviously the business case around that was around proximity of the principal residence that the nodes would be in. So, but fit for purpose. They're looking at what the need is and what the solution is. So that would be my message to you. Here in Southern Grampians, and other regional areas, the low power wide area network, of which LoRaWAN has been rolled out and the Things network through Meshed, is a great example of a technology that can be used to place sensors quickly to get connectivity that's low cost but will also take us a step further. So fit for purpose is what we need to do. And a couple more minutes. Connected places is a key intervention that I see around the world and is important for regional Australia. When we talk about affordability, not everyone can afford to have the internet access to their home. So connected places are critical for digital inclusion. Libraries, study hubs, co-working spaces, public spaces. So when we start to look at our communities and we start to understand that it's the children that haven't got access at home to complete homework, to keep them engaged, it would be better for a community to invest in a local study hub close to the school or in a place close to where their parents work. So there's probably not a commercial model for that. I haven't seen one yet that's actually survived long enough. It's probably too soon. There's certainly some fledglings. So that's where council often can play the role to kickstart. So coming back to all of those actors working together, you need to work out what intervention is needed and then act on that for your community. My favourite are men's sheds. 987 of them nationally, 130 more than McDonald's. I think it's the fact that there's 130 more than McDonald's that's what appeals to me. But social isolation of elderly people and disengagement of elderly men are a critical issue in rural communities. And we've invested and are investing in men's sheds. It was only recently that Orange announced a tech shed, a men's tech shed. So go to the places where people are at. Let's not make this so hard. All of these interventions will work towards digital inclusion. So digital future, it's not even, but let's get even. My mantra is let's keep it simple. In being a technologist and working in an ICT company and partnering with them for 20 years, it's easy to complicate this. Break it down to community need, focus on that, collaborate and intervene quickly because it's critical. Our nation's prosperity relies upon it and also our local communities. So your $7, I had to include this because I felt like you should all go and buy a TATS lotto ticket for $7 and then invest it in a digital project in your local community. Because on Sunday, the same time as I went through my resources and I found the earlier example of the chap in Ivory Coast, I walked past our local pub, the Gordon, and this sandwich board was out the front. So I had to take a photo because it said, I won't be impressed with technology until I can download food, and coffee and cake, $7. What made me smile about that is in my town, for a rural town to even reference the fact that technology could even download food was a major step. That's a major step. Actually, we can 3D print food now, so I didn't want to sort of write that on the sandwich board. But so buy your $7 TATS ticket. If you win something, invest it in your community and act now for digital inclusion and rural communities. Thank you, Hugh.